to talk about tonight. The United States invades the United States. America chooses who they want to live with in the MAGA divorce. And Trump has an escalation that lasts longer than 4 hours. So let's get into the headlines. By now, you've probably seen all the protest footage out of LA in the wake of Trump's immigration sweeps. But despite what you're seeing on the news, keep in mind that most of the protesters have come with more of a chill SoCal vibe, dancing, playing music, and unleashing these devastating projectiles at police. So there's definitely a chance that this can all be resolved peacefully, as long as nobody escalates this thing with an unnecessary show of force. We'll be A-O.
President Trump mobilizing 2,000 California National Guard troops against the will of the state's governor.
President Trump ordered the deployment of 2,000 more California National Guard troops, making for a total of 4,000.
Now making the unprecedented move of dispatching 700 active duty Marines to the streets of Los Angeles.
Yes, nothing calms down a situation like a military invasion. In fact, that was part of my birth plan. I was like, honey, I want candles, classical music, and 700 armed Marines storming the hospital room. Also drugs, lots of drugs. You know what, scratch that, just the drugs. You know, I'm beginning to wonder if Trump is intentionally trying to escalate this situation because more chaos allows him to portray blue states as centers of crime while positioning himself as a strong man that the country needs to rally around. No, that's silly. I'm sure he's just doing what's best for everyone. Although deploying soldiers in an American city could put Trump on the wrong side of the law again.
There is concern over violating the Posse Comitatus Act.
The Posse Comitatus law says that the U.S. military cannot engage in police functions on U.S. soil.
That's right, Posse Comitatus. It's a very serious legal principle. So let's hear more about this very serious legal principle.
Look, I believe strongly in Posse Comitatus.
Indeed, Trump is truly in violation of Pussy Comitatus. That's to say nothing of his violations of the Snatch Act. But in all seriousness, this is an extreme measure. The last time Pussy Comitatus was used, it was on your mom last night! Oh! Another major concern here is that Trump called up the National Guard without permission from Gavin Newsom, governor of California and man with strong opinions about the food and business class. But Newsom is hitting back.
The absurdity of this cannot be understated. There were 2,000 National Guard that were, quote unquote, deployed, of which only 315 actually were mission assigned. 1,700 have no particular role or responsibility.
This wouldn't be the first time someone went to LA looking for a role and couldn't find one. Hey, you listen to me, 1,700 troops. You keep following your dreams. You work on your craft, knock down those doors, and most importantly, do not go into porn. Do not. Don't do it. Although if you did, I've got a great title for you.
Pussy Comitatus.
There it is. So, okay, Newsom is lobbing the unfathomable accusation that Trump might make decisions without fully thinking them through, but I'm sure Trump will be the bigger man here.
Earlier in the day, the president suggesting that it might be a good idea if his border czar, Tom Homan, arrested the California governor.
I would do it if I were Tom. I think it's great.
When asked what crime Newsom has committed to warrant arrest, the president responding,
I think his primary crime is running for governor because he's done such a bad job.
That's a ridiculous statement from Trump. Gavin Newsom's primary crime is obviously his podcast. And even if Newsom wasn't good at his job, being a bad governor doesn't mean you should get arrested. It means you should be mayor of New York.
you for joining me today. I was working on this really large file about, Peter Thiel and all that stuff with Palantir. Palantir and this business in Los Angeles is all over social media today. In the last few days, because of all these so-called protesters, that has an air of similarity. I believe it's all rigged up. What's going to happen next? Well, workers are failing to show up because they're afraid of getting hauled off. They have this agenda to get rid of like 3,000 people a day. So they're just basically rounding up the, easiest ones they can grab, right? People who are already here on visas and all that kind of stuff. So I thought we'd take a big look into the law order of all this, because I have the show about Peter Thiel, and them also includes all the drugs these people are on. Most of them are on some sort of prescription medication, illegal drugs or whatever, but I thought, well, before I get started on all of that, and I'm also working my way toward the Gary Webb story, which happened around Los Angeles. Remember, Los Angeles, 1980s. So this goes back to the 90s, actually, because they rigged another one. You hear the words Rodney King come up and things. Rodney King may be new to some of you, but I'll be going into all that today, because Rodney King was also a false flag. So lots of reasons to believe that what's going on right now is not exactly true, but something to give a lot of fear and move people toward different things. And also remember, one way to distract: the United States is trillions of dollars in debt. Everybody's talking about Palantir, the spine, and all that stuff. They're even talking about putting a dome over the United States. They really are going a little bit too far. So before you start buying into all of this stuff down the road, Palantir, just hang on to your hats until I get to that show, because Palantir is not what people are saying. Not even close. So anyway, and they're also yelling, oh, they can't use the military against citizens. Well, yeah, they can. And they call in the National Guards, right? So let's talk about how the National Guard has been deployed in the past. How I think this is working out is likely around the antebellum period was when things were moving along. The Muslims had built those big houses and all the stuff that happened here. The people that started off in the UK and went to Amsterdam and then ended up here on the Mayflower, that group of people, they were likely just plotting the whole way, right? So they were here, living here amongst everybody else, and they were plotting to take over. I think the antebellum period was the last period the people who owned those homes were really alive or functioning, because right after the antebellum period was the golden Gilded Age. So that's where I think this is all going. We're going back to the Gilded Age, an era they know well. But what's different now is most of the rulers are now on drugs. Things are pretty much out of control. But for today, I have to focus on just this one thing. In the clip you just heard, they talked about this Posse Comitatus Act. And that was enacted in June 18th, 1878. Gives us another date, right? It appears to me that right after they took over, they started coming up with all these dates, right? Came up with mental hospitals to put us in. And they came up with all these ways to kind of confine us. So what was the main purpose of this? It was to prevent the federal government from using the U.S. Army or the Air Force to enforce domestic laws without congressional or constitutional authorization. So they wanted to come up with this law saying that the military can't be used, right? Well, that is sort of how it works and sort of not how it works. What they do is they build these laws based on other laws. So this law came from the Insurrection Act of 1807, I think, is the base of this whole thing that we have going on here. So that's where they got that one from. And so what they claim, that it protects civil liberties and prevents military occupation of civilian spaces. And keep in mind, since 1933, the United States has, in fact, and I will tell you exactly all the laws today, has been, in fact, under emergency laws since 1933. Now, if you go looking and you plug into some chat thing and say, oh, has the United States been under this law since 1933? They'll say, no, it hasn't been. Why are they saying no? Well, because it's how the trick works, right? In 1933, they did, in fact, pass laws to make U.S. citizens enemies of the state. But what happened was that they kept renewing these laws under different laws. And so, yes, in fact, in 1976, they made a big change again. But I'll show you the whole path there because, yes, in fact, ever since 1933, one law after another has been enforced. So basically, the United States has been operating under the state of emergency since 1933, and when we were all declared enemies of the state at the same time. So first, let's take a look at, and also another thing that I'll be covering with the Peter Thiel thing, besides all these people, or a lot of them are taking prescription medications, it's important to know the characteristics of these people, right? I mean, besides the fact they're psychopaths, they're all on, a lot of them appear to be on medications. I have a whole list of things to go over about that whole part of it. But besides the medication, and this is the big zinger that I'll be getting back to, I've talked in the past about I have early dementia now because of what's going on in my home with all this dirty electricity. Well, some interesting things have cropped up. I thought I was reading it wrong for quite a while. Actually, the part is this. It is anticipated through some very good studies, and I have all of them all done, that almost 50% of the world population will soon have dementia. This is a quiet war. What's going on is what a fabulous trick, right? Because you give all your enemies, those of us who you want to destroy their DNA, you give us all dementia. We can't remember how you got us, right? So yeah, pretty startling statistics, but I thought, I can't tackle it all today. And I've got some issues with my laptop. So today we're just going to focus on this military stuff, which will lead up to this other stuff, because we not only have people in charge taking vast amounts of prescription medications, but the dementia issue. And I recognize some things in Trump, but I can't go there today. So anyway, so let's look at this posse comitatus business. And I have everything you ever wanted to know posted on my website, so you can take a look at your leisure at all these laws and stuff, okay? So the first time it was used was 1957. There was in Little Rock, Arkansas, when they desegregated the schools. Eisenhower invoked the Insurrection Act. They always have some act that ties us together. So that's what happened then. 1957 was the first use. 1992, the LA riots after the Rodney King verdict. The National Guard was under state control under the Insurrection Act, and federal troops were called in. So that was under the LA riots after the Rodney King verdict. What basically happened during Rodney King was this. First of all, Rodney King was a black man speeding through LA. Supposedly, he was pulled over by 4 white cops, beaten to pulp. Some guy happened to have a video to take the picture. I'm going to tell you today why that was a complete psyops. Rodney King, oh yeah, he got the heck beat out of him, but it was on purpose. So anyway, so that's the last time that posse deal was used, was during Rodney King. So anyway, so Rodney King, what happened was cops pulled him over, beat the daylights out of him. It was the first viral video in this country, and so we all believed it. I was living in California at the time, so we all believed what was going on, right? But turns out it wasn't true. So anyway, so this guy video cams it happening, but people didn't break out into the streets rioting right then. People really were pretty respectful and didn't start rioting until after it went to trial, and the cops were acquitted. And I'll get more into that in a bit. So it was after the verdict. So it didn't happen after Rodney King got beat. It happened a little while later. And I'll have all that in a second here. It was also used during Hurricane Katrina. And we know how that turned out. The military provided aid, but evidently not law enforcement. But Hurricane Katrina didn't go too well. It was also used during the George Floyd protest, which I also believe was a complete psyops also. The National Guard was activated by states. Debate over Trump's consideration of the Insurrection Act was going on. So what does this posse comitatus mean? It means Latin. It's power of the county. And you'll know in a bit here why I'm saying this, because the LA cops also have talked in the past, they're gang members. So when you hear LA cops, keep a couple of things in mind. In the 80s, during the Gary Webb era, which I will be getting back to, they were all involved in crack cocaine throughout the black community. So by the 80s, they had been pretty much disabling the black community by that point. Okay, so then this comes up, right? This Rodney King gets pulled over by the cops. But what was the flashpoint? Another name you'll hear is a man named Reginald Denny. Reginald Denny was beat, and he was one of the first major flashpoints of the 1992 Los Angeles riots. But the spark was the jury's acquittal of the 4 LAPD officers in the Rodney King beating case, and they were acquitted on April the 29th, 1992. So, what happened with Reginald Denny? Well, I believe he was part of the Psyops, but you're going to have to decide for yourself. April 29th, 1992, 6:45 p.m., just hours after the verdict, Reginald Denny, a white truck driver, was pulled from his truck at the intersection of Florence and Normandy in south central Los Angeles. He was beaten severely by a group of young black men in front of live TV cameras. So not only is Rodney King the first person that we see the cops beating on film, so we now have proof that black people are being beat on film, right? But this Reginald Denny was pulled from his truck by a group of young black men in front of live TV cameras. Sounds very suspicious to me. The attack was broadcast live, shocking the nation and inflaming tensions. This is all about getting us to hate each other. The Denny attack symbolized the chaos and racial anger exploding in LA. It marked the moment the riots turned violent and uncontrollable. Media coverage of the beatings, particularly from helicopters, made it one of the most iconic moments of the riots. Denny was eventually rescued by 4 black bystanders who drove him to the hospital. And also people really praised that. So the main assailants were known as the LA Four. So Damian Williams, Henry Watson, Antoine Miller, and Gary Williamson. And they all got different sentences, okay? Did they really do it? Yeah, they really beat that guy to a pulp on live TV, but was it on purpose? Yeah, likely. But see, when they do these things on purpose, most people think, no one would let themselves get beat up like that. No one would beat up somebody like that. Well, of course they would, because these are psychopaths, and it's also part of their Jesuit deal, right? They beat and kill their own people. So Rodney King's beating and the officer's acquittal are what caused the riots, okay? And Reginald Denny's beating was the first widely televised act of riot violence and symbolized the eruption of public anger, racial frustration, and collapse of public order. So, yeah, and I think they make it appear that way, right? And keep in mind, when you look at these pictures of what's going on, they're always doing close range shots. Like, for example, all of this in Los Angeles is getting staged in front of 2 federal buildings. So who's in front of those federal buildings? Well, all the people in riot gear and stuff, right? And all the media, the so-called media is there. So look at those pictures a little bit closer again. So you see a whole bunch of media people surrounding a whole bunch of people in riot gear and stuff, right? You don't really see that many people behind all these people protesting, because they're trying to build it up like it's all over Los Angeles and it's literally thousands of people and things are running out of control. And they're staging it with the way that they're filming these initial shots. Same way they used Lookout Mountain to stage all the photography they were going to need from to prove in their own evil minds the bomb over Japan. So they used Lookout Mountain to stage all the photos. So they're doing the same thing here. They're staging these videos to just so happen to be in front of 2 federal buildings, and you got all the photographers there, right? So Rodney King was an unarmed black man who was pulled over by the LAPD after a high-speed chase. He was brutally beaten by 4 white officers. A bystander just happened to film the beatings. The video was widely broadcast and sparked national outrage, and it was huge during that time, okay? So that happened March the 3rd, 1991. The trial itself was in 1992. And what did they do there? Well, they caused even more problems because they moved the trial to a place called Simi Valley, California, which was a predominantly white suburb. And I remember distinctly all this going on because people were outraged that these cops who supposedly beat Rodney King, the black man, were being tried in Simi Valley, a predominantly white suburb. So on April the 29th, pay attention to these dates. I'll have some more about that in a minute. April 29th, 1992, a mostly white jury acquitted 3 of the officers, and the jury deadlocked on 1 of them. The acquittals sparked immediate outrage in Los Angeles. So the LA riots, which everybody's referencing now, happened between April the 29th to May the 4th, 1992. It consisted of widespread rioting, arson, looting, and violence erupted, especially in South Central Los Angeles. Over 60 people were killed, thousands injured, and more than $1 billion in damages occurred. Local police were overwhelmed, leading to the deployment of the California National Guard, the U.S. Army, and the Marines. And what they're doing now is they're acting like the cops aren't involved now in all these ICE movements, but what they're doing is the cops are running the borders and stuff. In other words, around these different areas and stuff, the cops are the ones setting it up so ICE can move in where they want. So yeah, they're all working together. So there were a couple of convictions, and Rodney King later received a $3.8 million judgment from the city of Los Angeles. So anyway, yeah, it was deployed after when they had the school desegregation, 1957. There were riots in Los Angeles, 1965. The National Guard was deployed. The Watts riots, those were called. 1967, the Detroit riot, the largest civil disturbance of the decade. Guard and Army were deployed. 43 people were dead. 1968, MLK assassination riots. After Martin Luther King's death, riots broke out in 125 cities. Guards were deployed widely. And then, of course, 1970, Kent State. Guards fired on anti-protesters and they killed 4 students. So the Rodney King riots of 1992, the California National Guard deployed 4,000 troops initially. Eventually, over 10,000 troops, including U.S. Army and Marines, were involved under Operation Garden Plot. So, yeah. They have some other times they've been called in after 1992. There was an event in Seattle, Washington, and then Hurricane Katrina, 2005. National Guard was deployed to assist with evacuations, rescue, and law enforcement. That didn't turn out too well. 2014, this was the first time that people consciously saw tanks and troops in the streets. That happened during Ferguson, Missouri, 2014. They were deployed after Michael Brown's shooting sparked protests and unrest. Here again, another false flag, right? But that was when they brought out all of the big tanks because they're getting all of the military equipment given to the cops right now. So the cops have tanks and all kinds of stuff. So then they were used again during the George Floyd protest, but I would say another psyops. The Guard was deployed in over 30 states due to widespread protests and riots. And then, of course, the Capital Six thing they call the guards were deployed to secure Washington, D.C. and support law enforcement. Over 25,000 troops guarded the 2021 inauguration. And that, again, it looked pretty fake to me, but hey, I don't know, a case when guards are actually letting their people into the gates and stuff and taking pictures with them and all kinds of stuff. It looked pretty phony to me. So I'm going to be back in a second here. Okay, I'm having a few issues with my laptop today. It's a little bit wobbly, so I recorded one whole segment and had to delete it. So if I'm sounding a little bit sketchy, it's because I'm trying to remember if I say this before or not. So, okay, so why is the National Guard used? The National Guard serves as a domestic military force under dual state/federal authority. But remember, the president overrules state authority, okay? Governors can deploy them under state active duty or what's called Title 32 status. But the president can federalize them under Title 10 if needed. So let's start with these national emergency powers. 1933 to 1976. It was the end of open-ended emergency powers in 1976. So how'd this all happen? So what happened was 1933 to 1976, they had this emergency powers thing going on. Then they renewed it in 1976 to the current. That's why if you go to look and ask for, has the United States been under national emergency powers since 1933? They will say, no, of course not. Well, yeah, because technically that's right, but really it is. So here's how the trick works. So I don't know if it's a trick, but it's kind of makes it more complicated. Let's put it this way. I've yet to see anybody on social media in the last few days actually address the actual facts here. So, okay, so March the 6th, 1933, President Franklin D. Roosevelt declares a national emergency to address the banking crisis, and they first used the Trading with the Enemies Act of 1917. So that was what was first used. And then what they do is they take that Trading with the Enemies Act and start tacking on these other things is how it works. So the Trading with the Enemy Act of 1917 allowed expanding military production and federal controls. That remained in effect until 1978. Okay. But here's what led up to 78. On March the 23rd, 1970, President Richard Nixon declares a national emergency during the postal workers' strike, and that authorized the use of the National Guard to deliver mail. August the 15th, 1971, Nixon declares another emergency to implement wage and price controls in response to inflation. So, 1973 to 1975, congressional investigations, the Church and Pike committees, uncover executive and intelligence abuses. September 14, 1976, Congress passes the National Emergency Act, or the NEA, that terminates all existing emergency declarations in 1978. It requires presidents to cite specific statutory powers. It also, emergencies must be renewed annually. Congress can terminate by joint resolution. So, 1979 to present, they have the continuous emergency powers under the NEA, the National Emergencies Act. See, it's flipped under there. See, that's why looking it all up gets a little bit more complicated. November the 14th, 1978, President Jimmy Carter declares national emergency over the Iran hostage crisis. And that one is still in effect as of 2025. And that has been renewed annually. President Clinton, January the 17th, 1995. President Bill Clinton declares emergency over foreign terrorist threats, leading to sanctions and new anti-terror finance powers. September 14th, 2001, President George W. Bush declares emergency after 9/11 attacks that activates broad military and intelligence powers. Still in effect, it's used for military operations, surveillance, and detention policies. February 15, 2019, President Donald Trump declares emergency to build the border wall that diverted military construction funds and is subject to legal challenges. January 31, 2020, COVID-19 public health emergency by HHS, and March 13, 2020, national emergency by Trump that enabled the Defense Production Act to use and FEMA response that ended in 2023. January 20th, 2025, President Trump, in his second term, declares multiple new emergencies: border immigration enforcement, energy infrastructure emergency, global trade and tariff crisis emergency, deployment of troops to U.S. cities amid unrest emergencies. So yeah, I think they've declared a lot of emergencies, right? So what's the summary here? Well, 1933 to 1976, emergency powers were used with few limits, remaining active for decades. In 1976, the NEA overhauled the system with transparency, term limits, and checks. 1979 to present, USA has had at least one national emergency in effect at all times. Over 40 active national emergencies as of 2025, mostly for foreign sanctions, terrorism, and immigration. So, yeah, I would say that it is, in fact, a fact that the U.S. is under the state of emergency. That means that all bets are off. The president has ultimate power. So what's all this mean? Well, let's talk first about martial law. Martial law is a temporary imposition of direct military control over normal civilian functions of government, usually in response to a national emergency, war, rebellion, or natural disaster. It suspends ordinary law and often includes curfews. Yeah, they have a curfew now in Los Angeles. Funny how this is working out. Restrictions on movement, suspension of civil liberties, and military tribunals. So what are the key features? Well, the military takes control over some or all aspects of government. Civil liberties may be suspended, freedom of speech, habeas corpus. Civilian courts may be replaced with military tribunals. Curfews, checkpoints, and warrantless arrests are often enforced. Where does this come from? Well, we come back to the Romans. I can hardly say this without bursting out at mad hysterics. So here we are back at the Romans, right? Where this Bible script was all written. The idea dates back to Roman times, Justifium, when civil law was suspended during emergencies. Influenced by English common law, where martial law could be declared in response to invasion or rebellion, but was viewed with suspicion due to the threat of civil liberties. U.S. legal foundations not explicitly defined in the U.S. Constitution. Gee, funny they left that off, right? Presidents and state governors have claimed the right to declare it in extreme situations. Article 1, Section 8 allows suspension of habeas corpus during rebellion or invasion when public safety requires it. They're only worried about our safety. That's why I'm always saying evil has to come packaged as law. evil has to come packaged as help. So, what is the history of martial law in the United States? Well, funny you should ask. The War of 1812. General Andrew Jackson declared martial law in New Orleans. 1861 to 1865, during the Civil War, Lincoln suspended habeas corpus, declared martial law in some areas. 1892, there was a labor strike. Idaho National Guard imposed martial law during mining unrest. 1994, Hawaiian labor unrest. Governor declared martial law over some dock strikes. 1991 to 1941, 1941 to 1944, World War II. Full martial law was imposed after the Pearl Harbor attack, and that was another false flag attack. See how handy these laws come out to be? And the civil courts were suspended. Then in 1954, that was when they were getting rid of integration. Eisenhower federalized the Guard and deployed the military. And then 1968, civil unrest in Chicago during MLK. 2005, Hurricane Katrina. So, yeah, pretty interesting stuff going on, right? I think they have enough laws to cover it. So let's talk about, why am I saying Rodney King was a Psyops? And keep in mind, I have all of this information posted down below for your reading convenience. Okay, so let's start off. This whole thing that's going on right now, it is all coded. It's all in the numbers. Do some things happen randomly? Yeah, of course they will. But basically, these big psyops are going to have codes all written in them. So it happened on March the 3rd. That is 3-3, right? Or 33, their key number. What is the code number for LAPD? It equals 12 plus 1 plus 16 plus 4 equals 33 again. What's the number for the police? Well, the police and race war. Race war is 9 plus 1 plus 3 plus 5, and that equals 33. RK for Rodney King equals 11. Following the acquittal of the LAPD, riots ensued in Los Angeles in April of 1992, being the worst in terms of death toll and destruction since the riots of the 1960s. The 1960s, that word means 33. On the date of April the 16th, 1993, well, that date, April 16th, 1993, that code ends up being 33. The word federal, when they do these code numbers, that ends up being 33 also. The code for police is also 33. The code for LAPD is also 33. Throughout history, the numbers 42 and 59 have been coded on Black Americans. In the case of Rodney King, his name in gematria, which is a code, is 59, and his birthday is 4-2, much like 42. So Rodney King, his numbers add up to be a 36. Rodney ends up being a 36. The name King is 23. Rodney King together is 59. Anyway, so I have it all down for you to take a look at. I believe this is all coded by the numbers. So what other enforcement things do we have going on? Well, I've talked about these in the past under that MK7 and the gang stalking. They have fusion centers in the United States, and I imagine this is being rolled out around the world. I believe the deal is take down the United States first, and then the rest of the countries will come next. So I'm going to guess what they've done here, they're doing in places like UK and Europe also, because you're also getting the whole smart meter stuff going on too. So fusion centers in the U.S. are intelligence sharing hubs that coordinate federal, state, tribal, local, and private sector information. They were established to improve information sharing after the 9/11 attacks, focusing on homeland security, terrorism, and crime prevention. Fusion centers are state-owned and operated entities that serve as central points for gathering, analyzing, and sharing threat-related information between the federal government, especially DHS and the FBI, state and local law enforcement, tribal and territorial governments, private sector, intelligence community. They aim to detect and respond to threats ranging from terrorism and gang violence to cybersecurity breaches and public health threats. What law created fusion centers? And before I go there, they hooked up my smart meter to a transformer in August of 2019. They came back to activate it around January or February of 2020. I believe that is happening through the fusion centers. And I've talked a lot about how they did that process, because what they're doing is they're also using Google Maps. So when they hook your house up to a transformer, to your smart meter, they're taking a picture and they're uploading that to Google Maps. And that is what they're doing to verify, I'm guessing, to the government that they completed that act, right? So obviously the government is probably paying local people to install that transformer on the smart meter. Now, then they came back out a couple of years after that when I wasn't dead yet, and they installed transformers all around my property. And when I looked again, that was also, they put that in under the same date. So I believe when they put in those extra transformers, that attached to probably the same purchase order when they made the first installation. So it's pretty simple. If you want to find out if you're being targeted, just look for those transformers. And I'm not going to go into it all today, but yeah, it is a very simple case of a silent war we're in right now. And I will be back on the other side in a second. I'll feel better if I save this much, and then I'll be back in a second here. And I'm back again. I'll have more in the future here, but it doesn't matter if you have a smart meter or not. If you're inside of a home and you're running your air conditioning or your heater, you're getting the same dirty electricity. The difference is the smart meter accelerates it, but everybody is getting the dirty electricity pretty much. So, okay, so where do these fusion centers come from? Fusion centers were not established by a single federal law, but rather, here it goes, evolved through federal actions post 9/11, security reforms, and federal funding streams. Patriot Act of 2001 that expanded federal surveillance and information sharing powers. Homeland Security Act of 2002 that created the Department of Homeland Security, or DHS, which began supporting state-level intelligence centers. The 9/11 Commission report on 2004, it recommended improved interagency and intergovernmental information sharing. Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act of 2004 strengthened mechanism for sharing terrorism-related information across all levels. Fusion centers grew rapidly in the mid-2000s with support from the DHS and DOJ, especially through Homeland Security grant programs. How many fusion centers are there? Well, as of 2024, there are 80 recognized fusion centers. These are formally designated by DHS and operate in 49 U.S. states, the District of Columbia, and several major urban areas. Some large states like California and Texas have multiple regional fusion centers. Who oversees them? Fusion centers are state-run, but coordination and guidance comes from multiple entities. The state and local government, they're operated by state law enforcement or emergency management agencies. State governors typically designate or support their creation. Local law enforcement contributes analysis and personnel. The federal government, under the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, provides oversight, funding, training, and information service systems. It has intelligence officers, or IOs. They're embedded in many fusion centers. Federal Bureau of Investigation, or FBI, often works in tandem with fusion centers and joint terrorism task forces, or JTTFs. What do fusion centers do? They focus on all hazards, all crimes, approaches, including terrorism threat assessment, criminal intelligence gathering, gangs of cartels or trafficking, monitoring of protests or dissident activity, cybersecurity threat analysis, public health emergency coordination, infrastructure protection, controversies and criticism, privacy violation, surveillance of protesters, journalists, and activists, lack of oversight, limited transparency, civil liberty concerns, mission creep, expansion beyond terrorism to monitor everyday crime or political activity. Effectiveness question. Senate report in 2012 said centers produce shoddy intelligence. Yeah, they're not looking to gather intelligence. They're looking to harass us, right? So once they identify you as being on part of their terrorist thing, then they start gang stalking you. And I've done shows about all of that, which I will make sure and link down below. So yeah, so what do they use? They use suspicious activity reports, or SARs. They use National Data Exchange. They use Homeland Security Information Networks. They use eGuardian, which is the FBI's threat sharing platform. So yeah, so they all work together. And they have the different ones. I have all of them down below. And down below, I did a search from early 2021. And how they started. I did a whole timeline on all of the dates, every move they made on these fusion centers. So let's go up to 2024. Fusion centers receive expanded federal cybersecurity funding. Continued criticism from privacy groups, journalists, and civil liberties watchdogs. Legislative proposals arise in some states to limit fusion centers. Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen. So, okay, so let's talk about the LAPD and gangs. Yes, you heard me right. Gangs, violent gangs. There is the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. It's called the LASD, Deputy Gangs and Cliques. Deputy gangs, whistleblowers, journalists, and civil rights groups have documented secretive cliques within the LASD for decades. These groups have been called deputy gangs, operating out of specific stations. Some notable gangs are called the Executioners, that's out of the Compton station. The Banditos, that's out of East LA station. The Grim Reapers, Cavemen, Jump Out Boys, and others are some other names of these gangs. In 2021, a report by UCLA's Luskin Center and civil rights attorneys documents over 18 active deputy gangs dating back to at least the 1970s. So before all this crack cocaine thing got started on the Black community, they did, in fact, have gangs, okay? And I've talked about this in the past. I'm just giving you the cliff notes now. 2019 to 2022, multiple lawsuits allege deputies beat, hazed, and retaliated against other deputies who refused to join these cliques. 2023, California State Legislature passed AB 958, defining law enforcement gangs and prohibiting participation in them. Well, I guess that's probably a little bit too late, but isn't that the point, right? So there's this one sheriff who's really a creep, Sheriff Alex Villanueva. He was a sheriff from 2018 to 2022. He was criticized for denying or downplaying gang activity. Another one, the current sheriff, Robert Luna, has pledged reform and internal investigations. Oh yeah, you get on that, right? Okay, so they have this one kind called crash units. It's the Community Resources Against Street Hoodlums. Initiated in the 1980s to fight gang violence, but later accused of behaving like a gang themselves. Then we have this rampant scandal from 1999 to 2001, a massive corruption case involving the Rampant Division Crash Unit. Officers planted evidence, committed perjury, engaged in theft, shootings, and gang activity. Over 100 convictions were overturned. Officer Rafael Perez became the key whistleblower after being caught stealing cocaine. LAPD paid over $70 million in civil settlements between 1999 and 2001. The reforms. This led to major reforms, including federal consent decree with the Department of Justice from 2001 to 2013, which led to internal audits, new oversight procedures, restructuring of anti-gang units. Ongoing lawsuits and watchdog reports suggest that both agencies, that's the LAPD and the LA Sheriff's Department, still have entrenched cultures that enable abuse and protect rogue officers. Groups like ACLU, Knock LA, and Stop LAPD Spine Coalition continue to document surveillance of activists, racial profiling, militarization, and abuse of gang databases. So, and they also have fusion center connections. Both the LAPD and the LA Sheriff's Department are tied into Southern California fusion centers. The LAJRIC, which is a Joint Regional Intelligence Center, it provides intelligence sharing, surveillance tools, and terrorism-related briefings. Yeah, I think these people sound like the right people to be in charge of this, if you ask me. You got the gang members in LA running the fusion center in LA. Well, hey, I'm just using LA as one example, okay? I'm not going to go through all 50 fusion centers, but since we're talking about riots in LA, which I am saying are fake, it's a perfect location, right? You got a bunch of crooked cops, a bunch of gang members, and you got a big fusion center there, right? Okay, so as part of the LASD lawsuits and whistleblowers, excuse me. Okay, a Captain Angela Walton in 2024 brought a whistleblower suit against alleging retaliation by LASD under Sheriff Villanueva for her efforts to address a public kneeling on a handcuffed inmate's head. I have all the links that go to these different things down below also. So next to the articles, you'll be able to click on the links to verify it for yourself. So then in court, this Villanueva guy, who's really just a sterling stand-up guy, January 2024, Villanueva testified, deputy gangs don't exist. While Walton and others testified they did. Okay, let me see here. Sergeant Vanessa Chow, 2022, she accused LASD, that's the Sheriff's Department leaders, of retaliating against her husband's investigation into the Banditos clique, their violent hazing. Court records show orders to avoid asking about deputy cliques. Several deputies faced firing, but no criminal charges due to perceived insufficient evidence. Well, yeah, you got the cops in charge of the evidence, right? It's kind of like what's going on in this town here. You know, people in this town are dead, but nobody can find them because nobody's looking, right? Multiple current former officers and retired Chief Hashing filed retaliation lawsuits against Sheriff Villanueva. Yeah, there's a lot of lawsuits going on. I'll just leave the rest of them for you to take a look at. So, LAPD, let me see, I think I did that twice. Yeah, it looks like a couple of cops have tried to sue them. And then there was a surveillance of protests from 2021 to 2020. LAPD requested ring camera feeds of Black Lives Matter protesters via the Safe LA Task Force, sparking privacy controversies. Yeah. And like I said, next to all of these particular things, I left the links, so just take a look yourself. So, timeline linking police misconduct to Fusion Center monitoring. Yeah. So yeah, I think they got the right cops in charge. If they got those gang members from the from LA running the Fusion Center. And we can't go without leaving the Kigali Principles. This is where this is all leading up to. The Kigali Principles are a set of 18 voluntary commitments made by countries to strengthen the effectiveness of the United Nations peacekeeping operations, especially to ensure they protect civilians in conflict zones. This is why evil must come packaged as help, right? And I have all of the countries, everything you want to know about the Kigali Principles. If you miss me rant past, that will all be listed for you down below. So if it looks like it's all a big setup, I think you'd be correct. That is how it appears to me. There is one character in this puzzle that I will talk about. I have all the links down below. There's a person named Miles Mathis. Get it? You flip those MMs on the side and you get 33, just like that Whitney Webb, the WW. That means 33, right? Miles Mathis goes around. He's a disinformation person. He wants everybody to think this is only just the Jews and they're the Phoenician army is behind it all. And I have a couple of links I'd like you to take a look at because Miles also did a show about Rodney King, okay, showing that Rodney King is not who they say he was. So what Miles does is he goes through all this genealogy stuff. Well, he wants everybody to believe that they're all Jews. He wants you to believe they're all from the Phoenician army. And he has only ever mentioned a pope once. He has only mentioned, I couldn't find any shows he's done about the Vatican. He writes blogs. He never talked about the Vatican and the Jesuits be connected. Kind of a funny thing to overlook, right? And he also, there's a piece that you can take a look at. It says, is Miles Mathis real? Is the Phoenician army behind everything? And they talk about his family and who he relates to. The reason they put people like Miles into place is for disinformation. They always leave key things off. So you can read all you want to know about Miles, but I think that he got most of the Rodney King stuff correct because he talks about Rodney King being an agent. And let me tell you just real briefly here. He has the different people involved in the Rodney King thing. I didn't find any omissions, okay? But what he did was Miles goes around to these places called Instant Checkmate, where they, or Find a Grave, where he cross-references people. Well, remember, Miles is also an agent himself, right? So I believe the agents set up these checking places, right? So anybody can go check on these places because remember, they're the ones who have built their own history into the facts, right? So whenever Miles is over checking on if this person relates to that person, well, they're the ones who produce these things. You got to be kidding yourself if you think there's tools online to figure out who these people are that are really right? There are always going to be some things wrong with them because that's how misinformation works. So Miles always uses these genealogy charts. Well, people have looked up Miles's background, and however this stuff works out, he is related to the people at the top himself. So in conclusion, this is what they do because Miles chews up a lot of people's time. He also chews up a lot of people's money. So people support people like Miles instead of people who are doing the actual work themselves. So yeah, they bleed off help for the rest of us, and they also control your time by doing all that. So yeah, so he has a lot of good stuff in here that he did uncover about the Rodney King thing, which I do believe is true. It's not to say that everything out of his mouth is a lie. What he's doing is he's misdirecting people, right? If you look into what he said about the Titanic, well, he misdirects things. So anyways, if you want to know more about why I'm saying it, just read the article below. I really try not to get myself in the position of really spending too much time listen, all these people are there to spin the deal, right? So if you're listening to people on social media, ask yourself this: would any of them be there talking to you if they weren't getting paid a ton of money, right? All of them are pretty much getting paid to deceive. And a lot of these people that I looked all around social media for the last few days to see what everybody's saying about these riots and all this stuff going on in Los Angeles. A lot of these people are attorneys themselves, okay? You think they don't know anything about the stuff I shared with you today? I have never been to law school, okay? And I figured this stuff out, how these laws work. You think any of them are going to be talking about the fact that the United States is still under the same emergency acts it has been since 1933? No, of course not, because they want to keep you out there busy chatting and having a good time and thinking, ah, yeah, we got the laws to protect us. Because they're all talking about the laws. They're all, oh, yeah, there's your First Amendment law getting breached. Listen, you don't have any laws. End of that conversation. So I'll be back because this is a fascinating part about the people are not only the people that are the citizens have all let themselves be tricked into thinking that this stuff is reality, right? And now they're all being further tricked. They keep talking about, you have these rights, your freedom of speech, you got these rights. No, they don't. So why are these people saying that? Well, because they're all part of the deception, right? Chew up your time, control where you're looking, and then they got you, right? So I would consider getting yourself safe. Make sure you have lights that work. I saw a case the other day, this young attorney, this guy wasn't a creep, he was actually a decent person, but he was trying to help somebody in his neighborhood who had immigration problems. Well, what happened to him? Well, two people showed up at his door. Two men showed up at his door, would not identify themselves, and wanted to know why was he talking to this person about their immigration status. Well, what he did was this: after they left, he went to access his Ring camera. Well, they had disabled his camera. So obviously, he said for the 30 minutes that they were talking to him, his Ring camera had been disabled. They're working with the local cops. They're disabling Ring cameras. So if you think your Ring camera is going to save you, think again. Get cameras that do not connect to the internet so you can prove yourself. And if nothing else, you can prove to your own family that you're not crazy, right? That these people really did show up. I wish I had a picture of when those utility workers showed up on my front doorstep, but I didn't because I didn't have my cameras in. Well, now I have cameras. I have cameras that do not work on the internet. Get cameras for your car. If you're driving, get dash cameras so no one will nail you and get you in trouble that way. So they're obviously disconnecting cameras when they come up to your door. So there's another system in place, probably being set up by the fusion centers. I have no proof of that, but it makes logical sense that the fusion center would say, hey, we're going around to interview this guy, cut the camera, right? Hey, they cut the camera. They installed the stuff here. I also got the utility company refused to take my payment when they were gang stalking me. So yeah, they play all kinds of tricks on you. So get those cameras. And if you want to really protect yourself, get a gun or two. I do not leave my room because I can no longer run. I do not leave the room that I stay in without that gun in a holster or in my little carry bag right on me at all times, so I don't have to run back to get it. So find yourself a nice little carry-on bag. They have some really nice belt buckle bags, fanny pack kind of bags. Carry it around. Don't leave it in one room and be in the other room. So times are going to get really insane. I believe if you have lights that work on batteries, if you have cameras that you could not hook up to the internet, likely when the robberies start, when all the lights get disconnected in your neighborhood, if you have lights, likely they won't hit your house. A lot of these people gang stalking us are chickens themselves. They're also cowards. Psychopaths are cowards. They do not want to get shot by coming to your door. I am making no plans to talk to anybody. You come on my property, end of conversation, the gun's coming out. So figure out how to prepare yourself. Don't just sit there like a sitting duck. So I'll be back with this other stuff about this dementia stuff and everything, because boy, it's really getting pretty interesting. So we're in a silent war. So protect yourself and your family the best way you can, because this country is going to be grinding down to a halt. Be safe out there. Goodbye for now.